minutes ago because the link was wrong. Just
Mm.
so you know, not only do I do an email the morning of, but I put a note on the site, Library 2.0, the front page and on the event page saying, here's how to get in if you can't find your confirmation.
Mm-hmm.
And I started doing that a couple of years ago, and it made a huge difference because people can't find their email. They can't,
Mm-hmm.
they're emailing the moment of, and that's the worst possible time for me to try to be responding.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the YouTube is set up. And I'm going to come back.
After everybody's gone and the recording is off, could you stay for a second and debrief with me?
I can't because we have our cohort from at the top of the next hour to the next one. So I'm going to be in two rooms at that moment,
Okay.
helping Crystal get started. But if you would like a debrief, could do it tomorrow. Would that be
Yeah.
helpful?
Yeah, that'd be fine. Yeah, that'd be good. Let me see what times I
Earlier the
am.
better for me.
I'm sorry.
Earlier the better.
Early the better. Okay. Let's take a look at my calendar here. Actually, tomorrow's a horrible time. How about how about what does your Monday look like?
Pretty good. You could just anytime in the before 1 o'clock my time.
Okay, I can do like I'm on the clock, so I can do like a 20-minute break.
Yeah,
How about at noon?
sure. Just send me an invite.
Sure.
Okay, so I'm going to open the room.
Okay.
If you need a bio break or to get something to drink, this is the time to do it,
I
and then
will.
I'll get us started in 5 minutes.
Sure.
Hi, it's Steve Hargadon, and we're about half a minute away from starting the session. Just wanted you to know that we are here. Sonia's here. Thanks for being here yourselves. You're welcome to put a note in the chat if you'd like to indicate where you're participating from. It's always fun to see where folks are coming from. Hi, it's Steve Hargadon, and welcome to a Library 2.0 webinar. This is an Everyday Librarian webinar with Sonia Schreier Norris, Managing Up, How to Work Well with the Boss You Actually Have. Welcome, Sonia.
Thank you. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're at. I'm sorry, that is the emergency broadcast system doing an alert right now in case you can hear that. Nothing actually bad is happening. It's wonderful seeing where everybody's from. You're from all over the country. This is so nice to be here with you today. I'm going to be talking about what I have learned the hard way about managing up and working with the bosses that I've actually had. And so I hope to leave you with some actionable data as we go through this hour together. I am located in Lansing, Michigan. So here's Michigan, and I'm right here. I am right in the center. This is where we located our capital of Lansing in case we get into a war with Ohio again, because that's happened and we need to protect ourselves. So I love seeing where you're from. And today I hope to provide you with perspective and methods to help you work toward the mutual benefit of you and your manager. So that's the definition of managing up that we're going to get to here in just a second. The mutual benefit of you and your manager. And I'm going to use the terms boss, manager, and supervisor interchangeably. So this is me. First, a bit about where I'm coming from. In this picture, I am a nice big woman in a dramatic outfit hugging a little free library box. I'm a proud third generation Michigan library worker. I've spent over 26 years in libraries myself, and I find my greatest professional satisfaction in providing continuing education solutions for library staff. I've created over 24 online courses that have been adopted in all 50 states and internationally. My articles have appeared in Computers and Libraries, Library Journal, for Cengage, and other publications. And I developed the Plum Librarian Consulting Firm to provide continuing education solutions. So right up front, we can all admit that the employee-supervisor dynamic is inherently difficult. There's this built-in power differential in that relationship that you can't work around easily. And for an employee, it often feels like the stakes of what's going on with your boss, they feel a lot higher to the employee than they do to the manager, because that employee doesn't have as much power to say what they want, to get what they want, or to make mountains move in ways that bosses sometimes can. And it also means that employees are generally a lot more sensitive to what their boss says, have more of an emotional reaction because of the impact that their boss's decisions can have on them. And when your relationship with your boss isn't working well, you're generally less happy. That sense of dread coming to work can color our entire perception, not just of our boss, not just of ourselves, but of the organization as a whole. And it can impact our health and well-being. So today we're going to talk about managing up. I like this definition. Comes from idealist.org, a method of career development that's based on consciously working for the mutual benefit of yourself and your boss. So once again, that's mutual benefit. Both you and your boss are succeeding in this situation. And by mastering managing up, your experience in the organization can change. Critically, it can help increase your emotional regulation skills in the workplace, which is a professional skill. This is an empowering and proactive approach, both for your career as well as for your emotional health on the job. And I hope I will be able to add some strategies to your toolkit. Managing up is about being an active and supportive participant in your relationship with your supervisor. It's not manipulation. It's not sucking up. The work needs to get done. It needs to get done well. So how exactly do we have a successful relationship with our supervisors to make that good work happen? So today we will focus on achieving these 4 key learning objectives. First, develop strategies to align your work goals with your supervisor's priorities. So for this, you must invest time to figure out the best way to align your goals and accountabilities with your boss's strategic priorities. Second, employ methods for building and maintaining trust. There is no substitute for the reputation we establish when we always tell the truth, even when it's hard on us and even when it's hard on our bosses. Third, cultivate empathy and reduce frustration by accepting your supervisor as a whole person. Bosses are just people. They are susceptible to the same human foibles that employees are, and their mistakes are often on display for criticism. There's a spotlight on what they do, how they act, what they say, what their facial expressions are. And fourth, it's important to have a realistic sense of control over your choices in the workplace and an understanding of what that means about the limitations of your control. Okay, let's dive in. Let's talk about building trust with our managers by aligning our work to their goals for the organization. You do not need to agree with everything your boss says or wants or thinks to have a great working relationship. You're going to want to invest time to figure out what your manager is trying to achieve, what their priorities are, and what they need from the person in your role. So you can simply ask direct questions to clarify what they need from you. Try questions like, what constitutes high performance for my role? How is my success measured? What support can I expect from you? And if you're not sure how your role contributes to their plan for success in the organization, just ask them about it. When you invest time understanding your boss's strategic priorities and how your role contributes to their goals, you position yourself to become invaluable to their team. You're not just doing tasks at that point. You're contributing to outcomes that matter to them and to the organization. And you can be an invaluable asset in any and every role in the library. So let's talk about ways to build and maintain trust with your boss. I have a name tag on the screen that just reads boss. Feels like it says everything. So the first way to build and maintain trust is through communication. And there are actually some communication hacks in the workplace. The hack is to pay attention to how your boss likes to communicate. So take some time to think about how your supervisor likes to get things done. How do they work? Do they walk around the office and talk to each person individually? That is a great time for updates if they manage by walking around. And you can keep a list at your desk for when they show up of things that you want to discuss with them. And that can be a great way in a moment where you're going to have a conversation to be able to bring your ideas and what's happening in your position to their attention. It may be that they would prefer a bullet pointed list of accomplishments and project updates at the end of the week. Maybe that's what they want. So your job is to figure out how to communicate with your boss so that they can hear you. Ask them, observe them, see what works for the two of you. And these are the kind of details I'm talking about. If they prefer emails over meetings, you got to just respect that, even if what you prefer is to be in person. And you might prefer phone calls. Once again, that more personal touch. But if they prefer texts, then you're going to want to text them to get the best results. And this alignment isn't about losing yourself or your agency. It's about being strategic in how you communicate so that your ideas and your work get the attention and support they deserve. So proactive communication is key to building trust, and you got to figure out how your boss likes to communicate and how they want to hear from you. There is no substitute for the reputation we establish when we always tell the truth, even when it's hard on us, even when it's hard on our bosses. Telling the truth is 100% within our control, and it pays huge dividends. You have sole authority and discretion over what you say and what you don't say. And if you want to be heard, tell the truth. I say this because delivering on what you say is the most powerful form of speech. When the people around you know that you mean what you say, you do what you say you will, then they will pay attention to what you say. Telling the truth will bring your power to make wild dreams come true in the library. So let's talk about what the truth is. We've got two Black people negotiating here on the screen. There are competing truths. What is true for you may be beside the point for your boss. They may have to be focused on something else entirely. So you may both be speaking truth, and you may both be experiencing different truths that are impacted by different priorities. For instance, it may be true for you that the collection development budget is insufficient to the needs of your community, and working with it has become increasingly difficult, and you feel like you're not really doing a very good job with collection development anymore because the funds are simply not there. And it may be true for your manager that the library director was compelled to spend a disproportionate amount of library resources on a plumbing problem this year. And now your manager has a reduced budget, and they are spending a disproportionate amount of time working with plumbers, and they don't know anything about plumbing. They just got picked to do this, and they're really anxious about it. So when you sit down to have a conversation with them about how you need more money to do your job well, there may be competing priorities and competing truths in that space. So let's talk about speaking up about what you need on the job. The more important the task, the more important it is to vocalize what you need and to be specific about what you need. If you need clock hours from other employees, if you need temporary employees, be specific about the tools and the materials needed to complete the task. Do some research, and if you need hardware, if you need software, if you need equipment, provide your manager with a budget. Be prepared, have a backup, Build in some options for your boss to choose from. A very powerful phrase is, I do not have the tools I need to do my job. That's a specific thing you can say to your boss. It's not whining. It's the start of identifying exactly what's missing and what you're going to need. Remember that bosses have resources in their back pockets that you may not be aware of. And here's something else to balance, and that's the risk of not keeping your boss informed. There are levels of being in trouble, and you don't want to be the second person to alert your manager that your project is in trouble. If something has gone wrong, or if you're not going to meet a deadline, tell them. It is better than the alternative. The costs of not speaking up when you're having a difficulty can be higher than the difficulty itself. If a project is failing, matters are only going to get worse if they don't know about it. So ask your boss for help, keep them informed, and we're going to come back to this later, so we're going to talk more about it. But proactive communication builds trust. It's okay that you need to say sometimes, I can't do this by myself, or I can't do this with the tools I have, or X, Y, or Z is going to need to be adjusted in order for this task to be completed. And regular updates reduce boss panic. Being honest about challenges demonstrates professionalism and gives your boss the opportunity to support you before things become critical. So next, we're going to talk about clarity in communication, specifically about hearing clear, direct communication from your supervisor that you don't want to hear. Because clarity is kindness. And I've got a graceful hand here on the screen reaching out, meant to symbolize that offering of kindness. Let's talk a little bit more about this concept. So, being kind is not the same thing as being nice. Kindness is a deeper and more genuine form of care than niceness. Kindness involves empathy and a desire to make a positive impact, even when the message itself is hard to hear. It is kind to tell you that the budget for your project has been discontinued before you do any more work on it. But it is not nice. And your supervisor may be super anxious because they know this is a really important project to you. They still have to remain calm. They have to say no, and they have to make no stick, regardless of what they're getting back from you. Niceness can be superficial or fleeting, and it doesn't work in every situation, especially when clarity is what's needed. And once again, clarity may be hard to hear, and that may be why your boss needs to engage it. Some things are hard and they just need to be heard. So recognize that some situations are simply difficult and unavoidable, even for bosses. So clarity in those moments, while it feels harsh, can actually be a good thing for you. So we've been talking here about how to establish a reputation for trustworthiness. So let's talk for a minute about trustworthiness in our bosses. And on my slide, I have a picture of the New York City skyline with the 9/11 memorial lights. So I want to tell you about what happened on the morning of September 11th for me, because it had a big impact on my relationship with my boss's boss's boss. So we were just forming a new department. The library was being absorbed into a larger department. And it was the morning, and we're all getting ready to take the elevators up to the floor where the meeting room's going to be. And someone outside the elevators had their phone and they said, a plane just hit the Twin Towers. And in my mind, I'm thinking, oh, that poor little prop engine plane, this pilot who must have had a heart attack or a stroke. And that was all we knew as we were going up to the meeting. Then we get into the meeting and we're meeting this boss's boss's boss formally for the first time. Everyone in the new department is together, our first time seeing everyone. And he is talking about the new department and new things we're going to need to do. And the second plane hits the Twin Towers. And folks had their phones. And then we knew, right? Then we knew it was an attack. Then we knew it wasn't an accident. Then we knew that something massive was happening right outside the doors of that room. And my boss's boss's boss said, this is the first day of the new organization, and you must all go get drug tested. You can leave now. You've got 24 hours. Go. So that was my first time meeting that boss's boss's boss, was September 11th. And I thought he must be the most cold-hearted person ever. And I'll talk about him again in a minute because he had to do some really hard things. That was not the only hard thing he had to do with this group of people, but it colored how I saw him because I thought that he must just have no empathy, no human kindness. And we were shocked. So sometimes what your manager wants you to do is going to drive you crazy. I was not thrilled by being sent out for a drug test on 9/11. And I've got a huge lion on this side because sometimes bosses can feel overwhelming and overpowering because they do have more power than you do. So let's take a simple example. Let's say your boss is wound super tight about the font size you use in emails, because some bosses are. And it does not matter what font size your boss prefers. Just use it. That's easy. And when it comes to professional matters, like let's say you come from one school of thought about how to set up a website, more text, more images, color contrast. Maybe they come from another school of thought about how to set up a website. And maybe you think that they are making bad decisions backed by faulty data that will be bad for patrons. And yet you still have to build this site the way they want it. And you believe that every hour you spend on it is a mild disservice to your patrons because your boss assigned the wrong approach. A lot of things at work like this are going to happen whole career. Roll with it. No matter how infuriating they are the boss. If they pick a method for developing a website, that's kind of the end of it. We are going to talk about when you have a better idea and how to address that with your manager. But you got to admit that when you're dealing with your manager, they have more power. And sometimes you just got to do what they say. And that's very frustrating. And I want to acknowledge that all of the hacks and tips and tricks in the world don't always get you out of doing what your boss wants when you think it's a bad idea. One common boss pain point is simply being told no. I've got a boss on the slide here with her hands outstretched and crossed to say no super clearly. Lots of clarity going on with this boss. So saying no can cause friction, and it can be awkward, unpleasant, and anxiety producing for the person who is saying no. Not all managers are skilled at saying no, but they all have to say it sometimes. Employees all have to hear it sometimes. It is not pleasant. You can make it better for yourself by how you respond in the moment. Here's the thing. When you're being told no, it's a chance to get more information. So let's say that you go to your boss with a win-win-win idea. It's brilliant. The thing is, bosses have competing priorities, and pressures from above and below them. Sometimes your boss is going to explain their competing priorities, and sometimes they don't. Sometimes in my past, I have really, really thought that they should have said yes because that's how brilliant my idea was. And I think I should have been invited to the table to negotiate the matter, maybe 5 hours a week of my time, maybe 10. I have a scroll on the slide reading invitation. But that's not always how it works. And when I have not been invited to problem solve, when I have been told no, I try to be cool. Okay. I'm not cool. I am uptight. I am wound. I am determined. I am driven. And I always think that what I think is right for the patron. And I know that's a horrible thing to think, but I do. So I act cool while I'm being told no, because the answer is still no. And so I try to focus on that moment and that outcome. So what do you do when you're being told no? Couple of things. First, I have this little trick. Concentrate on listening and responding through body language. Don't interrupt them. You just want to respond through your body language. Relax your shoulders, smile a little, maintain eye contact with natural breaks. And here is my personal trick. I open my hands at my sides. It's not conspicuous. Nobody's going to notice that you're doing it, but it helps me to be receptive. And it is also strangely difficult during a tense conversation, but it does help me to be more receptive. The other thing is to acknowledge that listening is really hard work. On the slide here, I have an ear with orange flames. Clarity is hard to hear. Being told no is hard to hear. But listening is within your control. You don't need to defend your ideas right at that moment. You can just listen while they explain themselves. Give them a chance to say everything they're going to say. This may be the moment where you get the most information that you're going to get about the situation. So use that moment of being told no to your advantage. So we got to acknowledge that not all bosses are good bosses. Or perhaps they're just not a good fit for that particular role. This is important information to have so you can figure out, once again, how to do your best work while you're on their staff. Maybe your boss didn't figure out that they are not a particularly good manager until they'd gotten their first management job. And then they're like, whoa, I didn't know it was going to be like this. I don't know that I really like this. But they bought a new house with their new income, and now they're kind of stuck and trapped in a job they're not good at. They may be difficult to work with. Maybe your boss is having a serious personal problem, a divorce, or a family member who requires around-the-clock medical care that they are responsible for arranging. Maybe one of their kids is mentally ill or addicted or in jail. We can't know their pressures, but we can know that they have them. And we can be pretty sure that their pressures are going to show up on the job sometimes, just like ours do. So maybe your boss hates their job. Maybe they wanted to work in forestry and now they're stuck inside all the time. And maybe they cringed at the thought of how badly they're doing their job. Maybe they take classes and go to conferences and talk to other managers and simply can't get the hang of it. Maybe they are defensive about their lack of skill, and maybe that's a really unattractive trait in them. So we're focused here on what's going wrong with the boss. Sometimes your boss just doesn't like you. It's a bad match. Maybe somebody who looks just like you ran over their dog when they were 10 years old, and that is just the way it is. You remind them of someone who did them a wrong. I've got a white woman on the slide here who's just banging her head into a wall. Your boss may never like you, but you can still do a good job on their staff. You can outlast them. You can transfer. Departments get mixed and matched all the time. And a bad boss is not necessarily a forever situation, even if you're not planning to leave the organization. Bosses often have a broader organizational perspective that differs from an employee's individual focus. So they're looking at something different. They've got different goals, but basically they go to work every day just like you, and they're glad when the end of the week comes. They're just people. So let's talk about that process of accepting your supervisor as a whole person. Let's look at a situation of a new manager, always a tricky period for them. So, a friend of mine was a highly skilled librarian. He did great work, and he applied for a management position, his first one, and he got it. So his pay increased, his status increased. He was very excited about this. He had all these great ideas. He had been a very effective worker, and he didn't know what day-to-day life looked like as a manager, but he was sure he could handle it. It was all good. He was very good at the business side of his job. So his wife, who was also a friend of mine and also a longtime library manager, gave him a box of tissues as a welcome to management gift. And I've got a box of tissues here on the slide. He was befuddled. His wife told him that people are now going to come into his office and cry. And on the slide, I've got a young white woman crying. My friend didn't believe her. He had never cried in his boss's office in his life. He couldn't imagine himself ever doing so. And within 1 week, an employee was in his office crying. He did not know how to navigate the situation. I know this guy. He was never good around tears. That's just not his cup of tea. And he felt helpless with how to handle this crying employee. And they both went home that night feeling distressed. And it was really bad for his reputation. He walks in the door and he gets tagged as a manager without empathy or compassion. And he felt like he was being punished by his staff. Managers are going to feel irritable sometimes and defensive because maybe they've got a mean streak that they're not proud of, or they feel insecure or anxious, or maybe they have some really poor interpersonal habits, like they blame other people when something goes wrong. I've got two boys on this slide screaming at one another. And our bosses live out their work lives on display for the people they supervise. I've got a red show curtain here on the slide. It is not easy. And, it's hard to be the person on stage that everyone feels completely free to criticize. What's more, the bosses are doing unpopular things under that spotlight. They are going to be the face of a whole bunch of rules that they didn't help write and may not agree with, but still need to defend. Okay, so what do we do about these bosses that we're having a difficult time getting along with? What do we do with a boss that we don't like or who doesn't like us? When you find yourself in conflict with your boss, cultivate kindness. Let's talk more about that. Everyone you meet is fighting a hard battle, even if you can't see it on the outside. Even if your boss has a really stony demeanor, or if they never share about their personal lives, you can be assured that they have their own hard battles to fight. So let's talk about cultivating kindness. If they have ever bought the staff pizza, stop and take the physical step of writing down the toppings on the pizza that you ate. Take that physical step. It is a step toward building kindness, that physical motion. And I've got a slice of pizza on the slide. If they ever brought in donuts, draw a picture of the different kinds of donuts in the box. These practices will help you grow empathy muscles. And having empathy for your boss is going to allow you to see them much more clearly and to see your working relationship as something that can go forward. And you want to be careful about how you frame conflicts with your boss in your own mind. You want to double check yourself if you find yourself thinking that a situation is moral or values based, because that creates a dichotomy where one of you is right and one of you is wrong. Some situations are going to be questions of morality, but most of the time they are not. Nothing that your boss does is worth you doing something to make the situation worse for yourself. So sometimes the surest bet in a highly charged situation is not to talk about it with other people at work, at least not at first. Don't let those big emotions start influencing the people around you about your way of thinking, because you don't want to let bad situations grow legs and get away from you or outlast your own upset emotions about it. I've got a pair of running shoes on the slide for this one. Don't give a bad situation room to grow outside of your control. Don't give it legs. And also, resolve that when you are offered kindness or niceness, maybe donuts, real or metaphorical, by your boss, that you are a person who chooses the donut with sprinkles. It is difficult to harbor a hard heart when you're licking sprinkles. And I've got a slide here with a whole bunch of really beautiful sprinkled donuts for this one. So I'm talking about all of this here, recognizing your boss as a whole person, choosing to accept a metaphorical gift from your boss, leaving space in your mind for them to be having a really bad month personally, not as a soft skill, but as a professional competency, strengthening emotional regulation in the workplace. It's real, it takes work, it takes practice. And here is a tip, because there are going to be a lot of hard times with your manager. With any supervisor you have, there are going to be really hard times. And when you are feeling unappreciated, or your boss had to say something really clear that day, I recommend rereading every nice thing your manager has written about you. It can keep you kind of humble in the relationship. Keep all the emails you have where your boss says you did a good job or thanks you, all of them. There's a middle-aged man on the slide here reading a set of papers, maybe a review from his own boss. But here's the trick I really want to share with you. Here is a pro tip about reading nice things that your boss has said about you. So I was in a difficult situation with my boss, just a momentary thing, but I was so mad. I was so hot. And I thought, oh, okay, fine. I'm going to go read the nice things folder. So I got into that nice things folder, and it felt good to see those things, but it also wasn't quite enough. So I got out an asynchronous video chat. I use Marco Polo if you're familiar with it, but basically what it allows me to do is record a short video, send it to a friend whenever I've created it, and then they can listen to it whenever they have time to listen to it. So I got out my thank you folder in my email, and I got out my phone, and I read all the best things out loud to 4 different people at 5 o'clock in the morning. And that's what I needed to do to get ready for the day that day, was to hear once again all of these things that were nice, that were true, that my boss had said about me, all the thank yous, and to hear them out loud. So I have got a big microphone on this slide. Okay, so let's get back to my 9/11 story, because my 9/11 manager later became one of the best managers I've ever had. And a couple of years later, like 2003, 5, he was charged with a partial shutdown of the library. And that decision was made several levels of management above him. There was nothing he could do to change that. He just had to oversee it. He had to fire people. He had to listen to people cry in his office and in staff meetings in front of 100 other people. He was told that what he was doing would have permanent negative consequences for library service across multiple states. And yet, that was his job, and he had been tasked with it by the governor's office. So, among all of the tasks that he had regarding shutting down certain library services, he also held a meeting every other week to answer employee questions. And every week, the room was hostile. All of our hostility was focused right on him. He was standing right in front of us. And finally, during a particularly difficult moment of intense frustration in the room, an employee raised his hand. He was called on, and he said, "So what you're saying is that there are things you know but can't tell us, and things you know and have told us, and things you don't know." And he said, "Yes." And it took the wind out of the sails of the room. It made the situation simpler to understand from his perspective, and to let us know that there was only ever going to be so much information to be had in the situation, but he was still going to show up every other week and take our questions. And I knew then that I could trust him because he told us the truth when it was really hard. He was up there every other week for months, answering questions from angry and anxious employees, and he never lost his equanimity. I look back now, all of that anger, all of that angst, month after month after month, he never lost his equanimity. That is emotional regulation. That is a professional skill. It's the same skill that you're cultivating when you are showing calm to your boss. And I respected him. The last time I saw him, I threw my arms around him, which I know is a huge work no-no. But even after all those years, I had just tremendous good feelings about him. And I really felt that I was safe around him. And it was because he told us the truth. So let me talk more about this concept of emotional regulation and why talk about donuts and pizza is not fluff. Using everyday occurrences to bolster good feelings towards your manager are necessary. You need to generate positive feelings from somewhere when the relationship is difficult, when you don't have a natural connection. Because it's really hard when you and your boss don't get along, right? It can be awful, especially on the worse than usual days. It's hard to come to work and your boss is in a horrible mood and takes it out on you. And the next day they brought in donuts to make up for it. And you're like, I don't feel like eating your guilt donuts. But here's the thing. It may be awful, and you may be able to handle it in a way that doesn't damage the relationship, that doesn't damage you professionally. Here's some examples. So when the manager was harshly criticizing you without reasonable cause, you stayed calm on the outside. That's emotional regulation. That's a learnable skill. They weren't calm. You told yourself maybe their dog or their cat had run away as you're trying to reframe and generate some empathy. That's emotional regulation. That's a professional skill. So they went on and kept complaining about your recent work on a project, and you didn't take that moment to argue your side. You knew you were going to have a greater conversation about the project later. But in that moment, when they were clearly not regulated, you didn't take that moment to argue your side. Keep the conversation short so it couldn't get any worse than it already was. And you then you go to your car and cry. You get an ice cream cone on the way home. You call your best friend and vent about what a horrible boss you have. And then the next day you go back in, and there you're faced with those guilt donuts. That's not an easy situation, and I think we've all experienced parts of it. The skills that helped in that situation were skills of emotional regulation. Okay, so let's talk about how to learn to disagree strategically by not burning bridges. There are a lot of situations that you are never going to win, and there are many cases where you and your boss can succeed together. Here's something to remember. A boss has folks telling them no also. She may agree with you 100%. She may think your plan is the single best idea on the subject she has ever heard. She may have the same idea herself, but she has folks telling her no too. It's not always about the employee, and it's not always about the manager. Managers may need to say no to an employee even when they agree with them. So try not to take a boss's no personally. Be graceful and always give them space to say yes later. Give them time to get used to your great idea or the change you want to see. I've got a young woman boss smiling with a big yes on this slide. So I want to share with you a short segment from the Harvard Business Review's Guide to Disagreeing with Your Boss.
What to say and how to say it. I'm going to share some advice to help you disagree with that authority figure more constructively and more confidently. Let's say your client is demanding an unrealistic timeline, or your senior colleague wants your buy-in on that doomed to fail idea. To decide if you should say something at all, it's helpful to first do a risk assessment. It's natural to avoid confrontation with a superior. As humans, we instinctively steer clear of situations that we fear might cause us harm, emotional rejection, or professional failure. But you might be overplaying these risks. Chances are you're not going to be fired or make an enemy just for speaking your mind, especially if you do it the right way. Most of us focus on the risk of saying something, but communication expert Joseph Grenny suggests we focus first on the risk of not saying something. What do you stand to lose? What opportunities could you or your team be missing out on? What could happen later if you don't raise this issue now? Then think through realistically what might happen if you voice your disagreement. And ask yourself, which is worse? You may decide speaking up truly isn't worth it, especially if the higher up is someone who you suspect will be vindictive, or your workplace has a history of punishing people for speaking their mind. But in many cases, sharing your opinion will be the right thing to do. Then you need to decide when and where to share it.
This is a really great video. You can find it on YouTube. Harvard Business Review guides have many different topics, and this one on disagreeing with your boss is well worth the listen. So you want to learn how to disagree strategically, right? And that means not burning bridges. There are a lot of situations where you're going to need to realize that you don't have control over the elements of what are happening, and you need to have that realistic sense of what you can make happen on your own. So this slide represents characteristics that resilient people embody from Better Up, and this is by Dr. Shauna Waters, sorry. And I know there's some problems with the concept of resilience, and I don't want to get into those today. I just want to focus on having that realistic sense of control. So as hard as these skills are to learn, the dividends they pay to our future selves make that work worth it. And I want to talk in particular about the having a realistic sense of control, because that one is especially important in our relationships with our bosses. So here's the thing that you got to understand, and that's the limitations over your control. And it can be really hard when you've got a lot of big feelings to realize that this isn't something that you're going to be able to control. If you brought a situation on the library floor to your boss's attention that you felt was important for them to hear, that's great. You did your job. That was within your circle of control. But you can't control whether they made an effort to understand your perspective or whether they will act on the information that you brought to them. Let's talk about a few more of the things we can't control about our bosses in the workplace. When we communicate what is true for us to our supervisors, we cannot control whether our bosses tell us their truth in return. We cannot control how much they say or the ways in which they say it. We can't control if our supervisors tell other people what they believe to be true, whether that helps us or hurts us. We have no control over what they say to anyone else. You can't control if they're telling themselves the truth. They may never get to where you are about a situation, even if you are the one who has a much better handle on the situation. You can't control what they're saying to themselves. You can't control what your boss thinks or how they choose to look at a situation. So what can you do in the meantime? You can practice self-advocacy. Develop your career plan. Don't wait for your current boss to care about your career. Remember, bosses come and go. You've got to be worried about how your career is going to develop with or without them. So seek advice from mentors and colleagues. Invest in professional growth through training and skill development. Advocate for library support of your training and skill development. And this presentation is a part of that skill development. And it's about more than the superficiality of donuts and pizza. It's about that real work of emotional regulation and those skills that you can build through reframing. If you invest in your career, and that includes how you interact with your bosses, you will feel more empowered because then you have more options and hopefully more confidence and a realistic sense of control in the workplace. I've got a happy woman on the screen here. The more you invest in yourself, the more confident you'll feel navigating difficult workplace situations. So let me conclude with just a couple of points that are going to stand the test of time in any workplace. So what about when it's bad with your boss, but it's not that bad? I've got a woman from the Asian Pacific Islands scratching her head here. You can disagree on something. You can disagree on a lot of things, and you can still do great work together. So do great work. As a matter of fact, even when it is really bad, do great work. If a trusted colleague were to draw a line down a piece of paper, and on one side, they list the people who help the library do a good job, and on the other side, they list the people that get in the way of the library doing a good job, you know which side you want to be on, no matter what is happening with your manager. You cannot go wrong by doing great work, even with someone you don't like or agree with. So as we know, choices we make at work have consequences. The choices our bosses make have consequences. And these choices and consequences can impact our health and safety, including our mental health. These choices impact our ability to pay rent and to retire comfortably. Hard things happen at work. I've got a man in business clothes here being crushed by 2 walls on the slide. So as you are navigating these choices, do what you respect by bringing your best self to your decision making. And that's a good bar. Do what you respect and bring your best self to the choices you make. And then, no matter the outcome of those choices, including impacts to your health and safety, including impacts to your ability to retire comfortably, you will respect yourself and you'll be okay, no matter what comes next. Now, some situations feel irretrievably bad. I have boiling clouds on the screen. Your hard feelings may be entirely justified. Maybe you are in the thick of a bad situation, and maybe you do not have control, and there are not enough sprinkles in the world to cover up the hole your boss has dug for themselves with you. When that time has passed, and you come to the place in your own life journey when you've gained perspective, when you've had distance from the situation, when you've done a lot of meditative breathing, like the mature woman on the screen here. And so when you choose to forgive them, even if it is only for your own sake, don't tell them. I've got a big metal sign here reading silence. Thank you. We are in good company. Here is my contact information. Feel free to reach out anytime. On this slide is a headshot of me with a crown of purple flowers beside an old-fashioned card catalog. And that card catalog is the one I have in my living room, in fact.
Thank you, Sonia. If you have a question, you're welcome to put it in the chat for Sonia. Otherwise, we'll have the recording up and the slides up tomorrow. Terrific job. Thank you.
Absolutely. If they have a question here about emulating this for accessibility purposes, please, it's time for all of us to start describing our slide decks with the new federal rules that are coming into place. So please emulate away.
Thanks, Sonia.
Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.